You've been lied to about how to study. You're told to reread, highlight, make summaries, repeat until you're numb. And when you fail to recall, you blame yourself, never the method. Here's the truth. These techniques feel productive because they're familiar. But that comfort, it's a trap. You confuse recognition with understanding. Picture this. You're standing in front of a locked safe. You trace your finger over the numbers on the dial, memorizing their order, feeling confident. But come the real test, the safe stays shut. You never understood the mechanism, just memorized the numbers. That's what most people do with knowledge. They collect facts like souvenirs, but can't unlock the vault when it matters. You sit with your notes, reciting definitions, filling in blanks. It feels like progress. But exam day arrives and your mind goes blank. Or worse, you answer with confidence and get it wrong, because you never saw the flaw in your logic. This isn't your fault. It's a system designed to reward shallow recall, not deep understanding. Why is this so seductive? Because it's easy. Repetition is a treadmill. You sweat, but go nowhere. School rewards you for running in place. You think you're learning because you remember the terms. But ask yourself, if you had to teach this to a child, could you? Or would you stutter, realizing you only know the words, not the meaning? Here's the hard pill. The method you trust most, repetition, summary, highlight, was built for passing, not for understanding. It's the educational equivalent of painting a rusted car. The gloss might impress from a distance, but underneath, nothing's fixed. But here's the error everyone makes. You mistake the feeling of familiarity for the reality of mastery. You think, I've seen this before, so I know it. But if someone swapped the numbers on the safe or asked you to explain why the lock works, you'd freeze. Recognition is not recall. Recall is not understanding. Understanding is being able to break the lock open, even if the numbers change. And yet, you keep doubling down. More highlighters, more colors, more summaries. You build a fortress of notes, but it's made of sand. The first wave of a real problem washes it away. The pain isn't just academic, it's existential. You start to believe you're not smart enough, that others have some secret. But the secret is this: the system is broken, not you. Are you tired of painting over rust? Are you ready to confront what you truly know versus what you pretend to know? Are you willing to stop playing the game of shallow learning and start building real understanding? If you want to be part of the minority that studies to understand, not just to pass a test, subscribe. Because in the next block, you'll meet the man who refused to play this losing game and changed science forever. Richard Feynman walked into a classroom and saw something you probably never noticed: rows of students memorizing terms, spitting out formulas, and calling it knowledge. But to Feynman, this was a magic trick gone wrong, a cheap illusion. He saw the difference between knowing the name of something and actually knowing the thing. Most people, he realized, were experts at the first and amateurs at the second. He used to say, if you can't explain it to a freshman, you don't understand it yourself, and he lived by it. Even at Nobel-level physics, he refused to hide behind jargon. Feynman's mind worked like a particle accelerator, smashing concepts into their core components, then showing you exactly what was left. He was allergic to pretense. He wanted to see the machinery inside the box, not just admire the packaging. Here's the scene. At Princeton, Feynman met students who could recite Maxwell's equations flawlessly. On paper, they were geniuses. But when he asked, "What does this equation actually mean? What would you see if you looked at an electromagnetic wave?" Silence. They had names, they had formulas, they didn't have meaning. Feynman saw this as a tragedy. He once said, "You can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird." Think of it like this. Imagine you're given a beautifully wrapped box. You can describe every detail of the wrapping: color, ribbon, texture. But if you never open the box, you have no idea what's inside. That's how most people study, obsessed with the wrapping, blind to the gift of understanding. They can decorate their answers with technical terms, but when the paper is torn away, there's nothing substantial inside. Feynman's obsession was the opposite. He tore off the wrapping. He didn't care how pretty the outside was. He wanted to feel, taste, and see what was inside the box, what reality was actually doing. He wanted to see the gears turning, not just read the instruction manual. He would break down a problem until it was so simple, so naked, that even a child could see the truth inside. He saw through the performance. He called out the difference between knowing a word and knowing the thing. To him, passing an exam by rote meant nothing if you couldn't connect the idea to the world. He believed that if you couldn't build a mental picture, if you couldn't play with the idea in your mind, you didn't really understand it. You were just repeating lines in a play, not living the experience. Here's the error everyone makes. You fool yourself into thinking you understand because you can repeat the words. But Feynman knew, reciting facts is not thinking, it's not learning, it's theater. It's the difference between reading a recipe and actually cooking the meal. One is safe, predictable, and empty. The other is messy, real, and unforgettable. He wasn't just smarter, he was relentless about cutting through the illusion. That's the Feynman contrast. He didn't settle for the comfort of knowing the answer. He demanded to know why the answer was true. And it changes everything. Here's where you've been misled. Your brain isn't a bucket, and facts aren't water you just pour in. The repetition, resume, rewrite cycle looks productive, but it's a factory of self-deception. Imagine copying a painting by tracing over it, never lifting the paper. When you pull it away, you realize you never learned to draw, you learn to trace. That's what rereading and summarizing do at a neural level. Your brain evolved to recognize patterns, not to store isolated facts. When you mindlessly repeat, your neurons form shallow connections. It's like building a bridge with sticks instead of steel. The information sits on the surface, unanchored. The moment you need to use it, an exam, a real-life problem, it collapses under pressure. Feynman called this the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing the thing. Most students are experts at naming. They can recite definitions, list steps, regurgitate formulas. But if you ask them to explain, to connect, to reason, they freeze. Because the traditional method never trains you to think, it trains you to mimic. Here's the neuroscience. Lasting memory forms when you struggle to retrieve, connect, and apply information in new contexts. Passive review never triggers the deep encoding you need. It feels safe, but it's biologically weak. You chase the dopamine of false fluency, the smooth flow of rereading, the comfort of seeing familiar notes. But comfort is the enemy of mastery. Painful recall, forced explanation, and error correction are what strengthen the neural pathways you crave. The brain rewards effort, not ease. But here's the trap everyone falls into. You mistake familiarity for understanding. You see your notes, recognize the words, and convince yourself you know. That's the grand illusion. The moment you step outside the script, everything crumbles. Feynman saw through this facade. He rejected any method that didn't expose ignorance. If you can't teach it, you don't know it. That's the brutal, liberating truth. Let's break this down even further. Think about how you learned to ride a bike. You didn't memorize a manual or watch someone else pedal for hours. You fell. You wobbled. You adjusted. Each mistake forced your brain to rewire, to build real skill. The same principle applies to learning anything complex. If your study method never puts you at risk of failure, you're not learning, you're rehearsing. And here's another layer. The brain is a prediction machine. It craves feedback from reality. When you only review, you never let your brain predict and fail. You rob yourself of the only process that builds robust knowledge. That's why Feynman's approach, forcing yourself to explain, to predict, to test, works. It aligns with how your biology actually learns. So the next time you're tempted to highlight, to reread, to summarize, ask yourself, am I tracing or am I drawing? Am I building a bridge of steel or just laying sticks across a gap? The answer determines whether you'll stand or fall when it matters. Ready for the shift? Here's the principle Feynman used to build real knowledge. Feynman's insight was brutal in its clarity. Knowing the name of something is not the same as understanding it. You can recite, repeat, and regurgitate. All you're doing is labeling, like sticking a post-it on a black box. That black box stays closed, its contents a mystery. Picture this. You're looking at a clock. You can point out the hands, the numbers, the ticking sound. But if someone asks how the gears inside move to keep time, you freeze. Feynman's genius was to pry open that clock. He didn't care about the label on the front. He wanted to see the cogs turning. He wanted to know what made the whole thing tick, not just what it was called. Here's the first principle. Deep understanding means you can break an idea into simple parts and rebuild it from scratch. If you can't explain a concept in plain language, you don't understand it. You've just memorized the surface. This is the difference between knowing the word gravity and being able to explain why an apple falls from a tree. Most people fall into the same trap. You think you know because you can repeat. But ask yourself, can I teach this to a 10-year-old? Could I explain it without using the exact words from the textbook? If the answer is no, you're stuck in what Feynman called the illusion of knowledge. Your brain is wired to prefer the shortcut, labeling over understanding. It's less effort. But this shortcut is a trap. It's why you blank out in exams. The neural pathways you built are shallow. They collapse under pressure. You've built a house of cards, not a foundation. Feynman shattered this by always forcing himself to reconstruct ideas from first principles. He started with the simplest question: what do I really know about this? He would write it out, connect concepts, and challenge every assumption. He hunted for gaps and confusion, not for the comfort of reciting. He wasn't afraid to admit when he didn't know. In fact, he saw ignorance as the starting point of real learning. Imagine you're learning about electricity. Most people memorize definitions: voltage, current, resistance. Feynman would ask, what actually happens when you flip a switch? He'd draw diagrams, create analogies, and break the process down until he could see the invisible electrons moving. He didn't stop until he could visualize the mechanism, not just name the parts. This is the moment most people miss. They confuse storage with synthesis. But real learning is active. It's taking the mechanism apart, seeing every piece, then building it back better. That's how Feynman turned knowledge into power. He didn't settle for the illusion, he demanded the reality. But here's the catch everyone ignores. The comfort of knowing the name is seductive. It feels like progress, but it's a mirage. Until you can teach it simply, until you can see the gears turning in your mind, you're still outside the clock, staring at the face, not the mechanism. And that's the difference between passing a test and truly understanding the universe. So, what does the Feynman technique actually look like in action? Strip away every complication. Forget colored markers, fancy apps, and endless highlighting. Here's the raw blueprint. First, choose the concept, not the chapter, not the subject, one precise idea. Like entropy, not thermodynamics. The narrower, the better. This is about focus, not coverage. Most people try to swallow the whole book. Feynman would rather dissect a single sentence until it bleeds meaning. Second, grab a blank page. Write the concept at the top. Now imagine you're teaching it to a curious 12-year-old. No jargon, no shortcuts. If your explanation starts to wobble, pause. That wobble is gold. It's your brain telling you, you don't understand this part. Third, go back to your source material only when you hit a wall, not before. This is critical. Most people run to the textbook at the first sign of discomfort, but that's just running from your ignorance. Feynman's rule: wrestle with the idea until you're forced to admit defeat. Only then return and fill the gap. Then test yourself again. Repeat until the explanation flows. Fourth, simplify. Once you've written your explanation, read it aloud. Cross out anything that sounds like you're trying to impress. If it doesn't survive in plain language, it's camouflage, not knowledge. Then test yourself again. Repeat until the explanation flows. If you can't follow your logic, you're still hiding behind words. Why does this work? Picture a glass of muddy water. The more you let it settle, the clearer it gets. Explaining to a child is what lets the sediment drop. The truth emerges. You're forced to see what's actually there. Most people never do this. They keep swirling the glass, mistaking movement for clarity. But when you do, each concept becomes a tool, not a trophy. You can wield it, build with it, break it apart. That's how you stop being a spectator and become a creator of ideas. But here's the real power. The act of teaching, even if your audience is imaginary, exposes every hole in your logic. There's no escape from the gaps. You're forced to confront your ignorance, not hide from it. Feynman called this the pleasure of finding things out. It's not comfortable, but it's honest. Here's the mistake everyone makes. They confuse recognition with recall, and recall with understanding. You recognize a word, so you think you know it. You can recall a definition, so you think you understand it. But until you can reconstruct the idea from scratch, in your own words, you're just parroting. Feynman's method is a filter. It catches every bit of fluff and leaves only the real substance. This is the method Feynman trusted above all. Not because it's easy, but because it's merciless. It won't flatter you. It won't let you pretend. But it will, finally, make you understand. And once you do, you'll never see learning the same way again. But here's where almost everyone stumbles. You know the method. You see its power. Yet when you sit down to study, something invisible grabs you by the collar and pulls you back to your old habits. Why? Because your brain is wired to crave comfort and confirmation. It wants to feel smart right now, not months from now. Imagine you're staring at a locked door. The key, the Feynman method, is in your hand. But a voice whispers, "Why bother? You already read the chapter. You underlined the main points. That's enough." That voice is ego. It hates being exposed. It prefers the illusion of knowing over the discomfort of admitting ignorance. Feynman called this the first principle of not fooling yourself. He saw it everywhere, even among Nobel laureates. People want to believe they understand, so they cling to rituals, highlighting, rereading, copying notes. It feels productive, but it's a mirage. Here's the analogy. Think of a gymnast who only watches routines but never steps on the mat. Every time you reread instead of explaining, you're just watching, never doing. You're building confidence, not competence. And your brain loves this fake progress. It's less painful, less embarrassing. But this is where most are trapped. The easy path, the one paved by ego, leads straight to shallow learning. Real understanding demands exposure. It means confronting gaps, struggling with words, feeling stupid. That's the price. Most aren't willing to pay it. They want the metal without the muscle. The obstacle isn't the method. It's your mind's resistance to being uncomfortable. It's the fear of facing what you don't know. Feynman himself admitted, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Here's the error everyone makes. They confuse familiarity with mastery. But mastery never feels comfortable at first. If your studying feels too smooth, you're not learning. You're just rehearsing. So the hidden trap isn't lack of knowledge. It's the refusal to be honest about what you don't know. Until you break that habit, you'll keep mistaking motion for progress, and you'll never unlock the real door. But let's dig deeper. Why is this trap so persistent? Because your brain is a master at conserving energy. It's designed to avoid pain and seek reward. When you highlight or reread, your brain gets a quick hit of satisfaction. It feels like you're making progress, but you're only reinforcing the surface. The real work, forcing yourself to explain, to question, to wrestle with confusion, costs more energy. It's uncomfortable. That's why your mind invents excuses. I'll do it later. I already kind of get it. Feynman never let himself off the hook. He'd say, if you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it. That's not just a slogan, it's a test. Every time you avoid this test, you're choosing comfort over growth. You're letting your ego drive, and your learning stalls. Here's another analogy. Imagine trying to get stronger by watching someone else lift weights. You can memorize their moves, study their form, but your muscles don't grow. Only struggle builds strength. Only confusion leads to clarity. If you're not willing to look foolish, you'll never get smarter. So, the real obstacle is inside you. It's the voice that says, don't risk looking dumb. It's the urge to protect your self-image instead of exposing your ignorance. But Feynman's method demands brutal honesty. It demands that you admit what you don't know and then attack it relentlessly. That's the only way to escape the trap and build real understanding. Now imagine this. Your learning isn't a locked school locker, it's a tool belt you carry everywhere. Feynman didn't just use his approach in physics lectures. He attacked every problem, every conversation with the same method. That's the real shift. You're not studying for a test. You're equipping yourself to handle anything, anywhere, anytime. Here's a visual for you. Picture two people. One is cramming facts into their head like loading bricks into a backpack. They walk hunched, weighed down, and when a real-world problem appears, a broken machine, a tough decision, a new concept, they just have bricks. Heavy, inert, useless for building anything. The other person, the Feynman type, collects tools. Each bit of understanding is a wrench, a lever, a screwdriver. When faced with a challenge, they reach into their tool belt, connect ideas, and actually build solutions. Bricks or tools, which are you carrying? This is the critical difference. Most people treat learning as a phase. Memorize, pass, forget. But life isn't a series of tests. The world doesn't reward those who can recite. It rewards those who can apply, adapt, and create. Feynman's scope wasn't limited to blackboards or exam halls. He used these principles to navigate arguments, learn languages, fix radios, even challenge the safety of the space shuttle. He didn't change methods, he changed targets. Every problem became an opportunity for real understanding. But here's the error everyone makes. They compartmentalize knowledge. This is just for school. I'll never use this again. That's the thinking that keeps your mind in a cage. Instead, start hunting for the underlying ideas that cross boundaries. Ask, how does this relate to what I already know? Or, where else can I use this? The more connections you build, the stronger your mental toolkit becomes. Feynman didn't see knowledge as isolated islands. He saw a network, a web, where every new insight strengthened the whole. Let's make it practical. The next time you learn something, don't just ask, what is this? Ask, why does this work? Where does it fail? How would I explain this to someone who knows nothing? That's how you turn facts into flexible tools. That's how you escape the trap of rote memorization and step into the world of real, portable understanding. Feynman's mindset is portable. When you learn to actually understand, when you wrestle with your ignorance until it submits, you become dangerous in the best way. Not just in exams, but in every arena of life. This is a universal shift, and almost nobody does it. Most people are still dragging around their bricks, mistaking weight for strength. But here's the kicker. You can start right now. In what you read, in what you hear, in every problem you face. But only if you're willing to drop the bricks and pick up the tools. That's the Feynman shift. And it doesn't just change how you study, it changes how you live. Because deep down, you know when you're faking. You sense the difference between memorizing the map and walking the terrain. Feynman didn't let himself hide in comfort. He forced himself, over and over, to name the real unknowns, to wrestle with confusion, to press until clarity clicked. Picture your mind as an engine. Most people pour in fuel but never turn the key. They read, they highlight, but the pistons never fire. Feynman's approach is the ignition. You confront what you don't know, you break it down, you build it back up. That's when the engine roars. That's when understanding becomes power. But here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They confuse activity with progress. It's like running on a treadmill and expecting to reach a new city. You sweat, you move, but you're stuck in the same place. Feynman's method is about getting off the treadmill, stepping outside, and actually moving forward. It's not about how much effort you spend, but whether that effort is moving you closer to real understanding. This isn't just for physics or exams. This is a blueprint for life. When you ditch the illusion of certainty, when you value truth over comfort, you become unshakable. Problems stop being threats. They become puzzles, opportunities to rewire your brain, to grow, to outpace who you were yesterday. You stop fearing mistakes because each mistake is a signpost pointing you toward deeper knowledge. You will feel resistance. Your ego will beg for shortcuts. Your habits will whisper, just reread, just review, just hope for the best. Shut them down. Ask yourself, do I want to look smart or do I want to be smart? The first path is crowded, noisy, and full of fragile egos. The second is lonely, but it's where the breakthroughs happen. Feynman called this the joy of finding things out. Not the joy of appearing to know, but the joy of actually knowing. So here's your new model. Don't memorize answers, dismantle questions. Don't decorate your mind, renovate it. Don't chase grades, chase understanding. This is how Feynman learned. This is how you can learn about anything for the rest of your life. And remember, understanding isn't a destination, it's a process. Every time you hit a wall, every time you admit, I don't get this yet, you're doing the real work. You're turning the key. You're building the engine that will carry you further than any shortcut ever could. If this video shifted even one gear in your mind, the next will spin the whole engine. Subscribe for the next mind shift, because this isn't about passing tests. It's about passing through the world with your eyes open.